Hi, my name is Yagya, and I'm talking about a case study for a young man called Benny who is having trouble at school. So I'm going to explain the personal issues, then outline the issues of disadvantage and social exclusion, then work out the intervention plan, and then justify the plan with knowledge and theory. So I've written this little list here to show, first of all, what some of the personal issues are: home life, dyslexia, weight, autism, and sexuality. Now, each of these leads on to something else. So the home life leads to neglect. This is evident by the fact that he has to buy his food all the time, that he's living with his mum, who seems a little bit dysfunctional somehow because she sleeps a lot and doesn't seem to have much money. So the issue of home life feeds into neglect, feeds into financial, which then goes to his weight problem, because he's probably not eating properly, which then goes to self-esteem. The self-esteem issue leads into his personality dysfunction, which might be evident in his attention-seeking behaviours, and leads into depression, could lead to suicide. His weight issues could lead to diabetes, which could lead to blindness and all sorts of horrible things. And then this leads on to learning difficulties, which all comes down to social isolation, leading from his self-esteem issues, transport issues, and the background into his home life. Now, this is complicated by the next personal issue, which is dyslexia. Dyslexia leads to learning difficulties, which then feeds back into the whole self-esteem cycle. Then we have the weight problem. So the weight problem leads into health determinants of general tiredness, energy problems, biological problems, physical and mental and emotional problems, which also lead back into the whole self-esteem cycle. Now then we have autism. So in the notes it said that Benny is autistic. Now that would lead into communication difficulties. So if he can't communicate with his peers properly, then that would also lead to self-esteem issues, and it could also lead back into his attention-seeking behaviour, which seems to backfire on him a bit. This is all complicated again by his sexuality. So his sexuality looks like it may be gay, it might be transsexual, but it seems to be an effort to establish his self-identity, which also then leads to the problem of his vulnerability. Now, to outline the issues of disadvantage and social exclusion, well, the disadvantage is that he has to fend for himself, is isolated, unhealthy, lonely, and has learning difficulties. His social exclusion issues come from a lack of communication skills, which lead from autism, a lack of self-worth, which lead from neglect, a lack of his integration with his peers, which comes back to activities like sport and social activities, which he feels excluded from because of his personality and his weight problems. And then he gets from all that a lack of respect from his peers due to his inappropriate behaviour and his attention seeking and sexual orientation. So everything sort of feeds back on each other to form this sort of vortex that will have to try and work himself out of. His potential as a fulfilled person is undermined by his disability. So of course, one of the issues that we talked about before was autism. So the autism has all sorts of social barriers in it. These include the discrimination, which then influences decisions and positions of power, peer interaction and isolation, and could lead to depression. dyslexia, of course, which we've already mentioned, has education outcomes, school attendance issues, leaving school early, which leads to bad career choices, long-term quality of life, and general self-worth and aspirations. Now, then we can come on to the intervention plan. So this is another little sort of thing here. In the intervention plan, we're going to look at neglect, education, autism, weight, sexuality, and self-esteem. Now, I just want to bring your attention over to here too. So this is how the theory of integrating different issues come into bear. So weight and sexuality and dyslexia and education all feed into his self-esteem issues. So although they're isolated issues in themselves, all the issues affect each other. So in the intervention stage, what we're looking at first is intervening in his home life. So in his home life, it seems to be the issues are his mother, financial, which leads into food, transport, and general stuff. So to intervene into his home life would mean to have the association or the intervention by some sort of government body. First of all, of course, you'd inquire with Benny. Maybe you'd inquire with his mother through the headmaster about what the situation is. Maybe his mother has an illness, maybe she has an addiction. Whatever the problem is, then you'd work out what the next step in intervention would be. Moving down the list is the next intervention would be with education. So Benny suffers from dyslexia and autism. Now, what we'd need to do is educate the teachers. I did say in the notes that Jennifer, his teacher, was away and he related to her, but what it would mean is to have more than one teacher that was trained to school Benny in the appropriate ways, and that would require system support, maybe funding from the education department. But there'd also be a possibility of looking into alternatives. So if Benny can't function in a normal school, in a normal and an average education system, then maybe TAFE might be better, maybe he'd be better as a fashion designer or something like that. Some sort of, you look at his strengths and then try and work on his strengths. And his strengths might be in computer design because he likes computers. So then we go into his intervention with his autism. So this would also need an attitude change through education at the school and the people that he deals with, and resilience. So you'd have to work up some sort of resilience which would come from counselling, sport, maybe martial arts, group activities, and then we could look at his weight. So the nutritional assessment would then lead on to whatever exercises and diet would be suitable for him. The next thing to look at was his sexuality. So this might be just him sort of playing with his self-identity. It might even be a sense of humour, who knows. But we'd look at it, and probably the best thing to do would be to get someone from the gay community who's appropriately qualified to talk to Benny about his sexuality and see if we can get some sort of counselling like that. And then the other intervention would be self-esteem. So although his self-esteem issues are embedded in all the other previous things that have been talked about, if he was able to get creative in his own way and be proud of something that he made, if we worked on his strengths, then that would upskill him and get his self-esteem going. So in all this, we have to take into consideration his inherent support system that he has now, which might be his brothers and sisters, it might be the school system, it might be his teacher, Mrs. Gentle. Now, then we look at the justification of the plan. So, what we're using here is a medical model, and the medical model says, for example, that the person's legs aren't the problem. It should be that the stairs that the person is trying to get up is the problem, which leads into the social model. And what we want to try and do here is move from a medical model to a social model. So rather than trying to change Benny, we're trying to change the things around him. Now, critical theory locates the disabled people's problems explicitly as the product of an unequal society and ties the solutions to social action and change. So that's what we're doing with the intervention. Notions of disability as social oppression mean that the prejudice and discrimination in themselves disable and restrict people's lives much more than the impairments do. So what we're trying to do is change the attitude, change the way we look at a disabled person. So that's like saying maybe at some stage in history I would have been disabled because I wear spectacles and my eyesight's not good. But now we have a different criteria of disablement, and as a society we have to take into account that level of disablement as being okay to work with and normal. Just treat someone like you do anyone else. So we're just running out of time here, so I'll just move on to the conclusion. Now, in conclusion, I can say that if Benny was presented to me to address his situation, I would initially investigate his personal issues and assess what impact they have on him. That is, the experiencing disadvantage and social exclusion, as the ramifications of these issues transfer into the physical and mental health and social impairment. My main goal for Benny is to have a trauma-free and fulfilled life. And this leads from the smaller goals, such as adjusting to his school life and education focus, resilience from peer group taunting, adjusting to his sexual preferences, looking at his weight problem and incorporating physical exercises and changing social attitudes, and looking at his home life with the possibility of intervention. These smaller goals would be subject to an intervention plan, and the plan attacks each of these problems individually. That is, weight, encouragement to exercise; home life, find out the underlying problem, refer to a suitable NGO; education, train teachers, try and change the school social attitude; sexual orientation, create a meeting with a rep from the gay community; and general, create resilience. And I think it'd probably be a good idea to encourage him to do some sort of voluntary work or social activity, maybe join a choir, go a walking group, something like that, something that he can go into as a new person, and then that would correlate with the Marxist theory of disability, in that anyone who's disabled should be a part of society and not institutionalised. Thank you.